need younger ideas for our 3D printing division. My name is Leo Banner. I am 52 years old, and I had just heard my career get flushed down the drain by a supervisor who looked like he could be my son. Trevor Walsh had been at North Peak Engineering for exactly 3 months. I had been there for 16 years. I stood in his glass office watching him shuffle through papers he clearly did not understand. Behind him, through the window, I could see the production floor where 8 industrial 3D printers hummed in perfect synchronization. Every single one of those machines ran on calibration protocols I had written. Every tolerance, every parameter, every failsafe, all of it came from my head, my hands, my experience. Leo, I appreciate everything you have done here, Trevor continued, not bothering to look up from his tablet. But the industry is changing. We need fresh perspectives. Innovation. The board wants us to modernize our approach. I had trained 3 generations of technicians. I had built the department from 2 desktop printers to a full manufacturing operation that brought in $4 million annually. But apparently that did not count as innovation. When do you want me gone? I asked. End of the week would be ideal. Human resources will handle the transition details. I nodded once. No shouting, no pleading. I had watched younger men get escorted out in handcuffs for less dignity than that. I will clean out my desk. Actually, Leo, we would prefer if you just take your personal items. Security protocol, you understand. I understood perfectly. They wanted me out before I could document anything, before I could leave instructions, before I could make their transition easy. I walked back to my workstation, past the machines that had been my life for the better part of 2 decades. Jason, one of my technicians, looked up from a calibration screen. Everything okay, Mr. Banner? Just fine, Jason. Keep those tolerances tight. I gathered my coffee mug, a photo of my late wife Karen, and a small toolkit that had belonged to my father. Everything else, the technical manuals, the protocol documentation, the troubleshooting guides, stayed exactly where it was. In my head. As I walked toward the exit, I caught a glimpse of Trevor through his office window. He was on the phone, probably already calling employment agencies looking for my replacement. Someone younger, someone cheaper, someone who had no idea what they were walking into. I handed my access card to security without a word. The machines kept humming behind me. For now. I had started at North Peak Engineering when 3D printing was still called rapid prototyping. Back then, we had 2 machines the size of washing machines that could barely print a coffee cup without warping. The technology was crude, but I saw the potential. While other tooling specialists dismissed it as a novelty, I spent nights learning the software, studying the chemistry of different polymers, understanding how temperature and humidity affected print quality. My wife Karen used to joke that I talked to those machines like they were people. She was not wrong. Each printer had its own personality, its own quirks. The Stratasys unit ran hot and needed constant cooling adjustments. The older Dimension printer had a feed mechanism that jammed if you pushed the print speed above 60%. I learned to coax perfect results from temperamental equipment. When North Peak decided to expand the 3D printing operation, they put me in charge. I wrote the protocols from scratch. Every calibration sequence, every material specification, every maintenance routine. I built safeguards into the system that prevented catastrophic failures. I trained technicians to recognize the early warning signs of problems. For 16 years, we had never had a complete production shutdown. Trevor Walsh had arrived 3 months ago with an MBA and big ideas about efficiency. He had never run a machine in his life, but he had spreadsheets that showed how much money the company could save with newer equipment and younger operators. He talked about Industry 4, and artificial intelligence like they were magic solutions that would eliminate the need for experience. I had tried to warn him about the complexity of our setup. Our 8 machines were not just printers, they were an interconnected system. The material handling, the environmental controls, the quality assurance protocols, everything depended on precise calibration. But Trevor saw only numbers on his reports: production output, labor costs, efficiency metrics. The warning signs had been there for weeks. Trevor started questioning my recommendations. He brought in consultants who had never worked with our specific equipment. He talked about outsourcing calibration to automated systems. When I explained why that would not work with our current setup, he accused me of being resistant to change. Last week, he had asked me to document all our procedures for the transition. I told him the documentation already existed in the system. What I did not tell him was that the most critical information, the tolerance specifications that kept everything running smoothly, existed only in my memory. Those numbers were not written down anywhere. They were the result of years of trial and error, thousands of test runs, countless adjustments made at 2 in the morning when nobody else was around. Now I was sitting in my truck in the parking lot, watching Trevor through his office window, wondering how long it would take. I spent the weekend in my garage working on a project that had been sitting unfinished for months. Karen had always wanted a wooden jewelry box with intricate carved details. I never found the time to complete it while I was working 60-hour weeks. Now I had nothing but time. Monday morning I did not drive to North Peak. Instead, I stayed home and sanded the jewelry box smooth, thinking about what came next. At 52, I was too young to retire, but too old to start over easily. The 3D printing industry was small. Word would get around about why I left. Trevor would make sure of that. Around 10 a.m., my phone rang. Jason. Mr. Banner, we are having some issues with Machine 3. The tolerances are drifting and I cannot figure out why. I almost answered. Almost walked him through the calibration sequence that would fix the problem. Then I remembered Trevor's words about younger ideas and fresh perspectives. I do not work there anymore, Jason. You will need to ask Mr. Walsh. He said to figure it out ourselves. Said the manuals have everything we need. The manuals? I almost laughed. The official documentation covered basic operation and standard maintenance. What it did not cover were the subtle adjustments needed to compensate for the building's HVAC system, the seasonal humidity changes, the way the concrete floor expanded and contracted with temperature shifts. Those adjustments were art, not science. I am sorry, Jason. My hands are tied. I hung up and went back to my woodworking. The jewelry box was coming together nicely. Karen would have loved the way the light played across the carved roses on the lid. Tuesday, Jason called again. Machine 3 was still drifting, and now Machine 5 was showing similar symptoms. By Wednesday, he sounded desperate. 4 machines were running outside acceptable tolerances. Production was slowing down. Quality control was rejecting 30% of the parts. I did not answer his calls after that. Thursday afternoon, I drove past North Peak on my way to the hardware store. The parking lot was full of cars I did not recognize. Consultants, probably. Troubleshooters brought in to solve problems that should not exist. Friday morning, I was applying the final coat of varnish to the jewelry box when the phone rang. This time, it was not Jason. It was Trevor. Leo, we need to talk. I do not work for you anymore, remember? The machines are having some technical difficulties. We could use your expertise as a consultant. Technical difficulties. Like they had caught the flu or something. I set down my brush and walked to the window. The morning sun was hitting the trees just right, casting long shadows across my yard. Karen used to love mornings like this. What kind of difficulties? I asked. Production issues? Quality problems? Nothing we cannot handle, but your input would be valuable. Nothing they could not handle. If that were true, he would not be calling. I might be available for consulting work, I told Trevor. My rate is $200 an hour, minimum 4-hour blocks. Payment up front. There was a long pause. That seems excessive, Leo. That is the market rate for emergency troubleshooting. Take it or leave it. He took it. That told me everything I needed to know about how bad things had gotten. I arrived at North Peak Monday morning and badged in with a temporary visitor card. The production floor looked like a war zone. 3 machines were completely shut down, their error lights blinking red. The other 5 were running, but I could hear the strain in their motors, the inconsistent rhythm that meant trouble. Jason met me at the entrance looking like he had not slept in days. Mr. Banner, thank God you are here. We have been trying everything, but nothing works for more than a few hours. I walked the floor, listening to each machine, checking the readouts on their control panels. The symptoms were exactly what I expected. The calibration parameters were drifting because nobody understood the environmental compensation factors I had built into the system. "What have you tried so far?" I asked. "We recalibrated everything according to the manual, brought in technicians from the equipment manufacturer, even had a consultant from Stratus's corporate come out. And they all said the machines are operating within normal specifications, but we keep getting defective parts. Print jobs are failing halfway through. The quality control department is rejecting everything." I nodded and pulled out my phone, making notes. The problems were cascading exactly as I had anticipated. The drift in Machine 3 had been the canary in the coal mine. Now the environmental factors that affected one machine were affecting them all. Trevor appeared beside me, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit. "So what do you think, Leo? Can we get this sorted out quickly?" "That depends. What changes have you made since I left?" "Nothing major. We brought in a new calibration consultant, updated some of the software parameters, made a few efficiency improvements." "Efficiency improvements?" I almost smiled. "Show me what you changed." For the next 2 hours, Trevor walked me through the modifications his consultant had recommended. New temperature settings that were supposed to reduce print times, adjusted feed rates that looked good on paper but ignored the realities of our specific setup, software updates that had overwritten custom parameters I had spent years perfecting. Every single change was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, but subtly wrong in ways that would compound over time, like adjusting a watch by a few seconds each day. Eventually, you would miss your appointment. "This is fixable," I told Trevor, "but it will take time, and it will require undoing most of what your consultant recommended." "How much time?" 2 weeks, minimum, maybe more depending on how much damage has been done to the calibration baselines. Trevor's face went pale. "We have orders to fill, contracts to meet. We cannot afford 2 weeks of downtime." "Then you should have thought about that before you fired the person who understood your system." I watched him process that, the calculation happening behind his eyes. The cost of keeping me on as a consultant for 2 weeks. The cost of missed deliveries and canceled contracts. The cost of explaining to his boss why the 3D printing department had ground to a halt. "What would you need to fix this?" he asked finally. "Full access to all systems, authority to make any changes I deem necessary, and no interference from your other consultants." Done. I spent the rest of the day documenting the current state of each machine, building a repair plan that would slowly bring the system back to stability. But as I worked, I realized something that made me pause. They had not just changed my calibration parameters, they had changed them in a way that made the system completely dependent on constant manual adjustment. Without someone who understood the underlying relationships between temperature, humidity, material flow, and print quality, the machines would never run consistently. Trevor had not just fired me. He had broken something that could not be easily fixed. On Wednesday morning, I was calibrating Machine 7 when I discovered something that stopped me cold. The machine's maintenance log showed software updates that I had not authorized. Someone had been in the system after I left, making changes to core parameters that controlled how the machines communicated with each other. I called Jason over. "Who installed these updates?" He looked at the screen, frowning. "Mr. Walsh brought in a consultant last week. Some guy from a company called Nexora Labs. Said he could optimize our network efficiency." Nexora Labs. I had never heard of them, but the changes they made were sophisticated. Too sophisticated for a random consultant. This was not about efficiency. It was about creating vendor dependency. I spent the next hour digging through system logs, following the digital breadcrumbs. What I found made my blood run cold. The consultant had not just updated software, he had installed remote monitoring tools that gave Nexora Labs access to our production data, our calibration settings, our entire manufacturing process. "Jason, where is the contract for this consulting work?" "Mr. Walsh has all that stuff." "Why?" I did not answer. Instead, I went to Trevor's office and knocked on his door. "I need to see the Nexora Labs contract." Trevor looked up from his computer, annoyed. "Why?" Are there updates causing problems? Just show me the contract. He pulled up a file on his screen and turned the monitor toward me. What I saw confirmed my worst suspicions. Nexora Labs was not a consulting company. They were a 3D printing service bureau, a direct competitor to our manufacturing operation. The contract was structured as a systems optimization agreement, but buried in the technical specifications was language that gave Nexora access to our production data for quality assurance purposes. They were not trying to fix our machines. They were sabotaging them while stealing our intellectual property. Trevor, you have been played. What are you talking about? I turned his monitor back toward him and highlighted the relevant sections. This company is not trying to help you. They are putting you out of business. Look at their website. Trevor pulled up Nexora's site. Their homepage featured case studies from companies that had switched from in-house 3D printing to outsourced manufacturing, companies just like Northpeak. The software updates they installed are designed to make your machines unreliable, I explained. Meanwhile, they are harvesting your production data to understand your customer requirements. When your machines finally fail completely, they will be perfectly positioned to offer you a full-service alternative. Trevor stared at the screen, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and something that might have been fear. But that would mean you got conned by professionals, and you fired the one person who might have caught it early enough to stop it. I watched him realize what this meant. Not just for the production department, but for his career. He had been at Northpeak for 3 months, long enough to take responsibility for decisions but not long enough to blame institutional problems. Can you fix this? He asked quietly. Maybe, but not in 2 weeks. This is going to require rebuilding the entire software infrastructure from scratch. We are talking months of work. How much would that cost? I did not answer immediately. I was thinking about Karen's jewelry box, sitting finished on my workbench at home, thinking about 16 years of loyalty that had bought me exactly nothing, thinking about younger ideas and fresh perspectives. That depends, I said finally, on whether you want to fix this properly or whether you want to keep pretending that experience does not matter. For the first time since I had known him, Trevor Walsh looked genuinely scared. I left Trevor's office without giving him an answer. Instead, I spent the afternoon documenting everything I had found. Screenshots of the unauthorized software installations, copies of the Nexora Labs contract, a detailed analysis of how the sabotage had been implemented. That evening, I called my old friend Marcus Wright, who worked in corporate security at a Fortune 500 company. Marcus had started his career as a machinist before moving into cybersecurity. He understood both worlds. Leo, good to hear from you. How is retirement treating you? I am not retired. I got fired, and I think I have stumbled onto something you might find interesting. I explained the situation. The sabotage, the data theft, the systematic destruction of our manufacturing capability. Marcus listened without interrupting, asking technical questions that told me he understood the implications. This is bigger than just your company, he said when I finished. If Nexora is doing this to you, they are probably doing it to others. Industrial sabotage on this scale is federal crime territory. What would you do? Document everything, but do not tip them off that you know. If they realize you have figured out their game, they will shut down their operation and disappear. What about Northpeak? We have contracts to fulfill. That is not your problem anymore, remember? You got fired. He was right, but it did not feel right. Jason and the other technicians had nothing to do with Trevor's bad decisions. They were good people who deserved better than watching their department get destroyed by corporate espionage. The next morning, I arrived at Northpeak with a proposal. I found Trevor in his office, looking like he had not slept. I have thought about your situation, I told him. I can fix this, but it has to be done my way. What are you proposing? Complete shutdown of the 3D printing operation for 1 week. We tell everyone it is for scheduled maintenance. During that week, I rebuild the entire software system from scratch, using clean backups from before your consultant made his changes. A week of downtime will cost us hundreds of thousands in missed deliveries. Less than Nexora is stealing from you every day. They are not just sabotaging your machines. They are copying your customer data, your part designs, your manufacturing processes. Every day you stay connected to their system is another day they build their competitive advantage. Trevor was quiet for a long moment. What would this cost? $50,000, plus a written apology to my technicians for the chaos of the past 2 weeks. $50,000? That is outrageous. No, that is what emergency industrial cybersecurity remediation costs. You can pay me or you can pay Nexora's ransom when they offer to take over your manufacturing contracts next month. I watched him calculate. $50,000 was expensive, but not compared to losing the entire 3D printing operation. And I was betting he did not want to explain to his boss how he had gotten the company hacked by a competitor. Fine, but I want a guarantee that this will work. Here is my guarantee: if I cannot get your machines running at full capacity within 1 week, you do not pay me a cent. That afternoon, I started the shutdown process. One by one, the machines went dark. To anyone watching from outside, it looked like routine maintenance. But I was performing surgery, cutting out the cancer that Nexora had implanted in our system. I worked 18-hour days, rebuilding calibration protocols from my memory, restoring backup files, testing every component of the network. By Friday, I had clean systems running on isolated servers, but I was not done yet. I had one more surprise for Nexora Labs, and for Trevor Walsh. Monday morning, I powered up the machines with their rebuilt software. Every printer came online smoothly, their calibration parameters locked in perfectly. The production floor hummed with the synchronized rhythm I remembered from 16 years of careful tuning. But the real show was happening in the network traffic. Before wiping Nexora's software, I had modified their data collection routines. Instead of sending our production data to their servers, the system was now feeding them carefully crafted misinformation. False part specifications, fake customer requirements, completely fictional manufacturing challenges. At 10 a.m., I called Trevor into the production area. Everything is running perfectly, I told him. Full production capacity restored. Trevor looked around the floor, watching technicians load fresh print jobs into machines that had been dead for a week. The relief on his face was obvious. How long will this last? Forever, as long as nobody installs unauthorized software again. I handed him a flash drive. This contains documentation of everything Nexora Labs did to your system. Dates, times, evidence of data theft. Also included is a report I sent to the FBI's cybercrime division this morning. Trevor's face went pale. The FBI? Industrial sabotage is a federal crime, especially when it involves theft of trade secrets across state lines. I thought they might be interested in Nexora's business model. But that means Nexora Labs is about to have a very bad day. And when the FBI raids their offices, they are going to find servers full of stolen data from companies just like ours. Companies whose executives made the same mistake you did. I watched him process the implications, not just the legal consequences for Nexora, but the embarrassment of explaining to his boss how he had nearly destroyed the 3D printing department by trusting criminals. What happens now? He asked quietly. Now your machines run perfectly, your production data stays secure, and you learn not to fire people who actually understand your business. I started walking toward the exit. Oh, and Trevor? When you write my check, make it out to Leo Banner Consulting. I have decided to start my own business. 3 weeks later, I was in my garage workshop, putting the finishing touches on a custom tooling project for a client in Phoenix, when the news broke. Nexora Labs had been raided by federal agents. Their executives were facing charges of industrial espionage, computer fraud, and theft of trade secrets. The investigation had uncovered evidence that they had sabotaged systems at more than 40 manufacturing companies across the country. Jason called that afternoon. Mr. Banner, did you see the news? I saw it. They are saying Nexora might have stolen millions of dollars worth of data. That is insane. Not really. Industrial espionage is a bigger business than most people realize. Mr. Walsh has been asking about you. I think he wants to apologize. I smiled at that. Tell Mr. Walsh that apologies are free, but consulting advice costs $200 an hour. A week later, I got a call from a small aerospace company in Colorado Springs. They had heard about what happened at North Peak through industry contacts. They needed someone to set up a new 3D printing operation for specialized components. "We want to do this right from the beginning," the owner told me. "No shortcuts, no quick fixes, just solid engineering and reliable systems." That sounds like something I can help with. I drove out to Colorado the following Monday, Karen's jewelry box packed carefully in my truck. I planned to give it to my daughter when I visited her in Denver. Karen would have liked that, seeing her jewelry box bring joy to someone else. The aerospace company's facility was clean and well organized, the kind of place where attention to detail mattered, where experience was valued over buzzwords. It felt like a good place to start the next chapter.